Hey guys, this is the Wiggle Man and welcome back to Wiggle's Miniature Workshop, where today we're going to be painting the Great Unclean One. This is one of my favourite models of all time from Games Workshop. I had a Great Unclean One that I painted previously, however that has gotten lost in moves and things like that, so I no longer own one. So now I've 3D printed my own. The source for this one is from Total War Warhammer 3. Sadly, it cannot be shared due to copyright and legal grey areas, things like that, which is unfortunate. However, I am here to paint this bad boy today anyway. And I enjoyed painting up this model so much that I am going to, as my hobby goal for 2024, paint one of each of the greater demons of chaos that has been 3D printed as well. So that's a Bloodthirster, a Keeper of Secrets, and a Lord of Change. I'm going to leave a link down in the description below where you can vote for what you'd like to see next from the channel. So for the base coat, we are working our way up from almost a muted purple all the way up to Scorpion Green, with midtones as kind of basically just a normal green. Then for the belly of the beast, what we do is we take our khaki brown and we highlight that with just a little bit of a skull white to give that pallid flesh look. Once we've done all that and once the model's all dried off, we will then take some streaking grime by AK Interactive and we'll airbrush that into all the recesses of the model. This is to give, it's a great unclean one. So we want it to look dirty. We want it to look unclean, funnily enough. And this is a perfect colour, perfect usage for it. And it's a bit of practice for me for enamel washes for an upcoming project that you will learn more about soon. So once that enamel wash is all dried out, I take our bone white and mix it with a little bit of scorpion green, add in some glaze medium by Vallejo, and we use that to start highlighting the transition where the belly meets the green skin. We lost quite a bit of detail with the enamel wash when we applied that, so now we're going to punch up those highlights a little bit more, make the model just pop that little bit more, because we want it nice, bright, vibrant greens. And we also use this opportunity to start highlighting the edges of the face as well. One key aspect I can say when you're painting models of this scale is you want to think of the face as the centerpiece of the model. It's where the eye is naturally drawn to straight away. So the more detail you've got in the face, the more of a wow effect you get on that first impression when looking at the model. And then to finalise kind of the bulk of the skin, basically our first area of effect, we take our scorpion green once again, thin it down a fair amount, and we do a very light airbrush over the areas that we've used the paintbrush on. This is to soften the effects of our brush strokes that are very visible on the model currently, and it adds quite a lot of texture underneath the skin. It's a very subtle effect. I'll be honest with you, the reason I did this was I didn't really like the brush strokes that I had left on the model, but once I'd applied this layer of airbrush, I felt like it added quite a lot to the final look of the model. This is what I like to call one of those happy little accidents, where you feel like you've messed up, but you trust the process and you keep adding to it, and you end up with something that you actually really like. So for the next stage of the model, we're now going to do one of my favourite bits, which is highlighting his little pustules. We start that off once again with our airbrush. We take our muted pink ink, which is very difficult to say. Try saying that. Muted pink ink, muted pink ink, muted pink ink. Yeah, okay. Well, it's fun to say. We use that muted pink ink to highlight all around both of his mouths, so it looks like he's been chomping down on some poor unsuspecting soul, but also to highlight around all of the pustules and all of his boils that we're going to be painting in the next stage. So when it comes to actually painting in the boils on the model itself, what we want to start off with is I'm using Vallejo Game Colour Dwarf Flesh. Jaquero Orange is also a good alternative if you're using Citadel paint and you just want to base it all out with that colour. Once you're done base coating all of the boils on the model, we're going to use our secret sauce, and that's Cassandora Yellow. I've had this pot for the longest time and I've never had a good use for it, but when it comes to painting boils in this method, I really think the Cassandora Yellow helps them to really pop out. It complements the muted pink that we put as an airbrush around the boils themselves, and just kind of gives them a lot more depth, a lot more of a soar bloody look to them. And then once you've given your Cassandora yellow enough time to dry, I just take, I believe it's Vallejo Game Colour Moon Yellow, Sun Yellow, any kind of yellow really will work here. And I take that and just highlight the upper part of the boil, and that completes the process. It's very quick, it's very simple, and it's very impactful. Now we're going back to the face. Once again, we're giving it another very fine highlight using our mixture of our flesh tone, our kind of pallid flesh tone mixed in with our scorpion green. And once again, this is mixed down with a little bit of glaze medium, and we're just going over the edges, around the lips, picking out the very highest of the highlights in order to kind of present that extra detail on the face. For the fleshy bits around the mouth of the belly, we are taking just a pure pallid flesh tone, mixing that in with a little bit of glaze medium, and we're going around all of the creases on the folds around the face, give it a little bit more depth, a bit more impression that it's dead skin kind of sloughing over. So basing out the teeth on the actual real proper mouth of the model, if you can say that, we are using a khaki colour, and we are just going over each tooth individually. It's very important to try to avoid getting paint in the recesses between each tooth. We then take Agrax Earthshade, good old Agrax Earthshade, and we go over all of the teeth. We can go into the recesses with this as well because it's not going to affect the black too much. We go over each tooth and give it a good solid soddening of the Agrax Earthshade. Once the Agrax Earthshade is dry, we then take our original colour that we painted the teeth in and use that to apply the highlights. Going for a non-metallic metal look on the blade, we start off with a 50-50 mix between Vallejo Game Colour Black and Vallejo Game Colour Cold Grey. We apply that all over the metallic areas. We then use a pure mix of Vallejo Game Colour Cold Grey and use that to start defining where our shine is going to be on the model. I'm not very non-metallically metal minded, so it's hard for me to say exactly where to put these highlights. I tend to just do it in certain areas where I think the light's going to catch it on one side of the model, and then I try and do the opposite on the other side of the model. We then mix a little bit of white into our cold grey colour and once again apply another highlight, this time staying within the boundaries of the cold grey that we've put down in the previous step. We then add even a little more white into our Vallejo cold grey mix, and we start to once again go further into our highlights that we're laying down, but also we start to edge highlight around the model. This is the stage where you want to edge highlight all of the edges on the model. Around the edge of the blade, because it's a great unclean one, he's got kind of notches and a worn away sword. I add little streaks in there to show that the blade's been blunted, corrupted, it's been eaten away at by rust and things like that, and it just helps add to the effect whilst maintaining that shiny look. We then take our Vallejo Game Colour Pure White and we go around all of the edges of the blade to really bring out make the rest of the paint job pop, make the sword look a little bit less flat. We take Vallejo Game Colour Turquoise, we really thin that down with a 5:1 ratio of water to turquoise, and we glaze that into the shaded areas of the model, so the areas where we've got our darkest parts. And finally we add some night blue that is also turned into a very thin glaze. I feel like it was a little bit too thick on my application here. I think that's my only personal criticism that I've given myself on the non-metallic metal that I've painted here. If you're looking at painting non-metallic metal for the first time yourself, then the biggest advice I can give you for it is trust the process and don't overthink it. Put some highlights in interesting looking areas. Don't think about being completely accurate, because as long as you trust the process and as long as you follow these steps, it can look good. Now we're going to add some secret sauce into the mix. It's a great unclean one, so he's got a gross weapon. Again, decay, plague, it's the whole theme of Nurgle. So we are using Dirty Down's rust effects. We're using it straight out of the pop that has been very thoroughly shaken up and heated up slightly as well, and we are going to apply that into all the kind of the recesses that are on the sword, the areas of corrosion. Now, because Dirty Down Rust is a product that is reactivated by water, once that's all dried out, it's too stark of an effect. So we take a little bit of water on our brush and we use that to feather it out across the whole of the blade, so there's not only the blue from the shadow that we added earlier, but also kind of a rusty brown across the whole of the blade, once again tying it together with the theme of decay. And then finally we add a little bit of Dirty Down Rust mixed with water back into the recesses, just to make those areas a bit more prominent, that's the source of where the rust is coming from. For all the skulls on the blade, we start off with a base coat of khaki and we just paint that into all the recesses all over the skulls that are on the blade. Once again, using our Agrex Earthshade straight out of the pot, we do quite a generous drobbing of this all over the skulls. I start in the middle of where the skulls are because I want it to be quite controlled. I don't want it to slip onto any of the paintwork that we've done on the blade already. So be warned there, it is a step to be careful about. And then once the Agrex Earthshade has dried on the upper areas, that you can see on the footage that it's still a little bit wet in the recesses. However, we're not going into the recesses, we're just going to put little highlights onto each skull individually just to make them stand out. And then finally we're going up to a bone white colour now, once again adding highlights onto each skull, this time focusing on the upper facing surfaces of the skulls. Moving swiftly on, we are now going to focus on painting the flail. So we're going to do a non-metallic metal effect, and just like the previous step, we're going to start off by using a 50-50 mix of Vallejo Cold Grey and Black. Now, instead of layering on this non-metallic metal look, we are going to do it nice, dirty and quickly using our dry brush. Again, we're using the same mix as we went up in the previous step when we did the sword, but this time we're just taking most of the excess off the brush and we're dry brushing it very carefully onto the model, ensuring that we don't get any paint on areas that we don't want it to be. This is very controlled, very, very light applications. And then as the final step, we just edge highlight on some white highlights around most of the edges. You don't have to be too precise here. You can be if you want to be, however that can be very time consuming. Again, we're just going for a quick dirty effect because it's very, very small areas that aren't going to be looked at with too much scrutiny. We're also going to be adding our rust effects by Dirty Down, and we're going to be doing that with a slightly different method this time around. We're going to be taking it pure out of the pot and we're going to be adding it very liberally around all the kind of the connections of the chain. The idea here is that essentially this will be dragged along the floor, it'll get a lot more moisture, it'll be a lot more rusty than the sword in the previous stage. And then once the first application's dried off, we then do a 50-50 mix of water with the rust effect, and we just spread that all over the chip. A piece of advice if you are using Dirty Down Rust is having a heat gun is very, very useful here, because you can see that the rust effect does get activated by heat, as well as just drying time in general. It's quite fun to watch as well when you blow dry it with a heat gun. You can see kind of the magic happen in real time. Next up, I want some elements of brass onto the models. So to do that, we're going to base coat the rings on the flail and the tops of the skulls. We're going to use a chocolatey brown. I believe I'm using dryad bark as the base coat. Because brass is naturally a little less shiny and a little more rugged of a material, we're not going quite as soft with our transitions in regards to putting on the non-metallic metaliness of it. I tend to just add a little bit of skull white into my mix and build up from there. So at the moment we're using a heavy brown mixed in with a little bit of skull white, and we're just dotting that around where we think the light would be catching the surfaces. And here we've added even more white into our mix, and now we're just being very, very splotchy, just scratching the model almost around where the highest highlights are going to be. I finish off some of the rest of the details. So for the horn, I did a very light dry brush of Vallejo model colour Cold Grey. I also did another highlight, edge highlight of pure white on the edges of the swords, because I'd realised when I'd watered down the rust effect, it kind of dulled down the edge highlight around the rest of the sword. So we're coming up to the end of the model now. If you've enjoyed this video, then please do subscribe. If you want to have a say in which demon gets painted next, then visit the link down in the description below and go vote. Let me know. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely evening, and bye-bye for now.